Okay,
40
I'm
minutes.
gonna call the board workshop. to order. And there was suggestion of let's work 8:30. See what we can do.
40 minutes, let's go.
Yep,
We need to add up the hours on this one.
110.
But I won't be finished with reading my stuff in 40 minutes.
Well, we go over, that's somebody else's problem. My kids aren't asleep, so. I can be here all night.
risk of putting you on a spot.
Red's
Maybe the
got
person
suspended
wondered
due
if
to
you
rain.
had any
Giants are losing
specific
4-2.
Questions. Or things that you would like to discuss, knowing that you're gonna be part of this moving forward, before we jump into our regularly scheduled fun.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I mean, I think the main thing, I mean, I have gone back and done my homework to try to best understand kind of where you all started and where things are at now and where there's still some, points of, maybe there isn't consensus or agreement. I mean, I do have, I think, some specific things, but I think there are things that have been brought up by other folks that I think will get brought up naturally that I don't think I need to bring up separately. I mean, I think one of the things that, and I don't know that this is helpful or not, and we don't need to dig into it. I think one of the things that I've just struggled with a little bit with this is, and maybe it's just that I need to go back and look at, OSBA is, when we start from a place of crafting something like this ourselves, just making sure that we're still hitting all the points and some things that I know need to be changed and making sure that those pieces are in there. And then maybe that's just homework for myself. The other pieces that, for me, just wasn't totally clear is, what, I mean, I'm a big fan of, addressing policy when something comes up that, causes the need for there to be a change. And so I guess I'm still struggling a little bit understanding what wasn't working about our current process, that then requires these updates. I think that's a bigger conversation that is necessary to this, that maybe I can have offline with someone. And so I'm more than happy to dig into, the specific areas that, I know people have been wanting to discuss, such as the 25-day public review period. I know that's something I have some questions about, but happy to start wherever folks would like to and just kind of jump in.
I just one fill-in comment. We actually waited until the OSBA draft came out and started with that.
So
So,
we started before that, but.
We
there were some
did,
People that.
but
said
then we
should-
stopped.
We should wait.
Okay.
Yeah, we stopped.
And the other thing I remember that was part of that conversation is
Oh.
how long it's been since that policy's been updated. That's another thing. And then there was. Yeah. Nathan can probably spell out a little better about the original history on trying to get ahead of some legislation and some concerns or
Well,
something.
it wasn't
like
really
that.
getting ahead of legislation. I mean, there was recognition that the policy was very old, needed to be refreshed and looked at. Even before that, it was HB 15 now, I think was the original one. But that played into the mix because obviously, and I think it's pretty widely recognized now that bill has caused a lot of misconceptions about what it's actually doing. And so I've mentioned that in the past, as well, here's a good reason to be crystal clear. Because there are a lot of misconceptions about what that bill actually does. And perceptions of how it affects districts. And I think that was pretty widely and widely acknowledged. If you look at the original bill came out, there were school districts and people from all over the state that were writing in opposition of it because they were concerned it was redundant. It was already protecting things that were already protected, and there was concern about local control. So, that played into, hey, we need to have a policy that's extremely clear. And the one that we were working on, the old one was not.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
I also, just one last thing, remember, at some point in this discussion, and this wasn't at the very beginning, but there was like a straw poll of some sort of. Test of like, board members individually, do we think this policy needs to be worked on, it's worthy of our time to be doing this? And everybody, including Debbie at the time, was like, yeah, we agree this policy needs to be worked on.
Absolutely. Well, no, and I,
Plus, once the draft came out, it's like, okay, that is the normal process. The draft OSBA change comes out, the board reviews it, and then moves forward with its version, or whatever.
yeah, well, and I absolutely want to honor the work that all of you have already done, and I know there's already been a lot of work and changes to this, and so I don't necessarily want to go backwards and rehash the work that you all have already done. Instead, just work on the pieces that I think are still pinpoints that based on the last policy meeting that I attended. But I by no means want to go back and rehash some of the things that I know you all have already kind of built some consensus around.
Yeah.
So,
Real quick, Tanya, we have red dots over here. Do these need to be green?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Since we met last time, and I don't know if you have it, Gwen, but there was a legal, update from, I guess the teacher union. Legal.
yeah, I've reviewed that, I'm up to speed on all those pieces.
Anybody want to take a, guess at where we left off or where we want to start tonight?
Where we left off is we had talked about, and I'm trying to figure out exactly where that was. We were talking about getting clarity from Gary on this, the third paragraph. The district shall not prohibit or refuse to approve the use of textbooks or instructional materials based on the inclusive perspective, studies or stories by an individual based on race, color, creed, sexual. No, that wasn't it. It was the one above. It was the one above.
The unique
Yeah, it was.
communities.
Yeah, it was the one. It was about the unique community.
It's under selection criteria, Joe, the very
Was it?
first sentence.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
and-
thank you.
Yeah, I think when you were here last
Yep.
time for that kind of started with my concern of just wanting to make sure we've at least gone through and addressed some of these legal comments and was questioning if we delete some of that language because of those concerns, does it substantially change
Yep.
our meat and potatoes of the policy? Is it really that? That we got on the individual unique community language.
So I listened to the last workshop session. And I tried 2.0, but that was too fast for me, so I listened to it at 1.5 speed. You're all entertaining at 2.0 speed.
Alvin and the chicken.
But many
Did
of
I
the,
express your viewpoint correctly?
actually, you did an excellent job there.
Thank you.
Many of the issues that you were talking about really are things that are, I'd call fine print type items that they don't matter until they do, but they actually do matter, the parts about community and stuff like that. And the other thing I got from listening to the workshop was this, I'll call it hyper focus on the OEA pushback. And so I just like to remind the board that our draft policy that we had, which we sent off to an attorney to be reviewed, said that we're in compliance with Oregon statutes and regulations concerning instruction and curriculum and the constitutional considerations that have arisen in challenges to school district determinations concerning library books. We believe the draft policy is legally supportable. And later on, he says, beyond these obligations, statutes and regulations concerning textbooks and instructional materials, are more prescriptive for the State Board of Education, but they're rather general for school districts. So we already have a legal opinion saying that the draft policy we have is legally supportable and constitutional considerations have been taken care of. And there was this big focus on the OEA, and it was almost like they were the legal experts. And I'm going to say the OEA's opinion, certainly they, there's always attorneys on both sides, but they come from a decidedly skewed point of view. So I was a little taken aback that we were spending so much time on the OEA's version because we had other legal comments saying our draft was fine.
Well, we have OSBA, it wasn't just, it was one, you mentioned it was one, Gary. OSBA as well.
Yeah.
OSBA's attorney, who's their policy person, plus the Portland firm, which I forget the name of.
One of the firms of Miller Nash, and the
Miller.
OSBA person is Spencer Lewis.
Right.
So that was just one kind of
And you read
observation.
from Miller Nash, right?
Yes.
So Gary, on one hand, I heard you say, and I'll just be specific to this item, there was, my proposal was kind of in a question, like, would it matter if we delete some of this language? And on one hand, I heard you say,
Yes.
it's not that important, but on the other hand, I heard you say it is.
No, I'm just saying that it is important. There are, call it nuance to some of those parts that you were trying to take out.
What would be an example of a part, Gary, that was trying to be taken out that had
Well,
nuances to it?
specifically communities, many of the case law and stuff like that are rooted in the fact that the local community gets to decide those things. And so saying in the policy that this is for our local community echoes those case law arguments related to this kind of material. And so trying to sanitize it by taking out that we're doing this for our local community essentially moves us away from being able to say, look, this case law supports us. So that's one.
Let me ask this question, and again, it's nuance maybe in a different direction, but it still would be nuance. When we look at that selection criteria one, which is I think the one you're addressing right now as well. Following selection criteria serve as guidelines to ensure instructional materials align with district goals and state standards. District goals to me basically says local community when we talk about district goals. The nuance that I'm a bit concerned about is while reflecting the unique values, needs, and priorities of our local community. I worry that the nuance there is that the education should be targeted as from a pedagogical point of view and from a content point of view to reflect basically what's in this community. And I would hope that we don't create a nuance that does that our families and our kids and our faculty and administrators all recognize that we do want to open kids' eyes up to the greater world. We don't want them to be isolated in their thought from just the local community. Not saying the local community is bad, just saying that feels like it's narrowing what the mission of education is.
But I would counter that the policy speaks for itself in that specific selection criteria. It's taught objectively. Number 4, fosters critical thinking, allows for viewpoint diversity, encourages students to be thoughtful and curious about complex or controversial topics, provides fair and accurate representation of many religious, ethnic, and cultural groups and their contributions to Oregon American heritage, culture, sciences, literature, and arts.
So,
So I just want to finish my thought, Gary. So when you look at this sentence that says reflecting the unique values, needs and priorities, there's three major things that this policy does. One, it establishes non-discrimination. We do not want to discriminate about anybody because of who they are
And I
or
think
their
we're clear
point of
on that.
view, right?
I think we're clear on that.
Two, it says we want to encourage these things that I just read and fair representation of the religious and ethnic and cultural groups. So it's very expansive in the community. And third, it's saying when the district has a broad array of material in front of them, and if some of that material contains specific sexual content, that we want them to choose the stuff that does not. So it's covering, keep out the egregiously sexually explicit stuff. It's saying, promote all these different people and types of people in the community, and it's saying non-discrimination. So it absolutely touches on everything that would come, that could even be considered in a community that is, diverse, inclusive, and has unique values and priorities. It touches on all those things very strongly. It is not a one-dimensional policy.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying there, except then it seems like there's a conflict then between those two sentences, because it says ensure instructional materials align with, and if you eliminate district goals and standards, it just said, okay, it would say ensure district materials align with these standards while reflecting the unique values and needs of our local community. Again, that seems in conflict with what you read. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, I think the reflection of the community is seen in the actual makeup of the board that was voted in by the community and all this input that we've been putting in.
But it's not
Yeah,
talking
over
about
time.
board, it's talking about instructional materials.
Okay, so
I just
understand how you
I
see
just
that
don't see this,
problematic.
I just don't see this as necessary, because I think it can give the impression that the education program, when we teach kids, we want to teach them clearly in the standards that our local community embraces, when many of them won't be living in this local community. They'll have to be operating in a world outside this local
I see what
community.
you're saying. I see what you're saying, but I guess I would just counter that as you go on and read the policy, it kind of answers that, because it's addressing a broad range of, values and special needs in the community.
Well, I would say, based on what you just said, then it begs the question, then how important is this to you to have in there when there's been legal objection and community members who've stated when they read that, they read code for some other agenda. And so if it's not super important, and Tanya, maybe you can just highlight the part that he just read there. It's the after the comma, while reflecting the unique values, needs. Is there need to have that in there,
What was the
What legal objection was that? The OEA legal
the
objection?
OEA.
But nobody.
And what's
else
interesting is the
recognized.
same thing the OEA is saying could be the potential for, claim of some sort of lawsuit or whatever, is the same reason that Gary is saying that would be our defense. So I'm a little bit conflicted.
so this is straight out of PICO. We are therefore in full agreement with petitioners that the local school boards must be permitted to establish and apply their curriculum in such a way as to transmit community values, and that there is a legitimate and substantial community interest in promoting respect for authority and traditional values, be they social, moral, or political. I mean,
So if that's established, then do we really need to say it? When it,
Or what?
on their end, is actually bringing up the question of, well, what are your unique values? What are your unique needs and your priorities? If you haven't defined those, then it's bringing this question of, is there some motive? Is there something behind it?
What is the motive? What is the motive to get rid of it? Because I don't understand the legal argument.
I guess my question is the value in having it in there when it's not, the policy below is clearly defined. And so it's not speaking to policy, because the policy below is, the following selection criteria be used for evaluating instructional materials will, and then all the items. the additional narrative, I'm wondering why that's included. If to your point, it's potentially, because it's not the actual direct policy, it is potentially being interpreted in a way that you're not intending. Why would we include additional narrative if it's not direct policy?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to understand the one to push this forward, why it's so hard to say, yeah, we can live without that.
I guess-
I don't hear
I guess
the,
for me,
the
I
meat
guess for
behind
me,
it.
if there was a strong legal argument, I'd be like, "Ooh, let's be careful. Let's take that out." But for me, it's what is the motivation to actually take it out? Do we want to set a precedent of, whatever this thing is, when that happens in the future, that we go, oh, yeah, and we get worried about language based off of a feeling of maybe, I don't know, a handful of people. I mean, that language is, most people read that, including the 2 attorneys we hired, and they went, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's not the legal issue. For me, it's the educational issue. I'm not looking at that as a legal issue. I mean, I understand the legal and the perception of some in the community. And I don't think it's 2 or 3 people. I think there's probably a large amount of the community that would take issue with it, and maybe not a majority, but a large amount of the community. My concern, that's right. And my concern is really, it's from the education standpoint, that it seems to be saying our local materials or our materials need to align with just the mindset of a community that you live in. And I'm concerned about that because we want our kids to be open and learn about the world
Okay,
and be exposed to all of that kind of stuff.
thank you for the segue.
What's that?
Thank you for the segue.
Oh, you're welcome.
I've actually been, after I listened to the whole thing, I was gonna try and verbalize something related to this openness part. And of course, I'm not very good at that, so I had to write it down and just read it. So, yeah, openness, the idea that openness requires including materials with sexually explicit content, that shielding students from that kind of material is somehow censorship or denial of critical thinking. So let me be clear, public education should expose students to a wide range of ideas, but there is a line, and that line is crossed when openness becomes a justification for graphic sexual content in books and lessons, especially for minors. We're not talking about shielding kids from difficult topics like history, identity, or injustice. We're talking about graphic descriptions of sexual acts, abuse, and trauma, often included in the name of representation or realism. Let's not pretend that that's a neutral educational choice. It's a philosophical stance, one that says students must be exposed to these things to be prepared for the world. But here's the truth. Students can be challenged, inspired, and made to think deeply without being sexualized. They can learn empathy and diversity without graphic narratives. And they can grow into informed citizens without being pushed beyond what most families and laws consider age appropriate. Saying no to excessive content isn't censorship, it's stewardship. It's a public school exercising responsibility to the whole community, not just the loudest ideological voices. And here's what happens when responsibility is neglected. Families leave. They turn to homeschooling, private schooling, or charter programs, not because they don't value public education, because they no longer trust it. Every time that trust is broken, we lose more students, and with them, the diversity, the funding, and community support that public education depends on. This isn't about left or right, it's about trust, and that trust is broken when openness becomes an excuse for excess. Schools must reflect the values of the community they serve. That means drawing clear lines about what is educational what is gratuitous, and what should be left to parents. When openness becomes a justification for material that would never be shown in a workplace or public meeting, and we all know how everybody gets offended when people start reading some of this stuff out loud in public meetings, we have to ask, who is really being served?
Let me respond because you gave me a bit of a segue there as well.
There you
Okay.
go.
Share with me, first of all, the source that you just read. You read that to us before, but what's the source of that?
I've never read that.
Those are your words?
Yeah.
These are your words. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're the source there. Okay. First of all of that was about the sexual stuff. The sexual stuff is addressed down below.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about sexual stuff when I talk about the unique values and needs and priorities of the local community in that statement. I'm talking about politics. I'm talking about philosophy. I'm talking about ways of teaching math. I'm talking about anything that has to do with education in general, history, all of that kind of stuff. I'm not talking just about, I'm saying it's to ensure instructional materials. It doesn't say instructional sexual materials or instructional gender materials. It says instructional materials. While reflecting the unique values and needs, they must basically reflect the unique values and needs and priorities of the local community. Well, let's say our community was a racist community. Okay, should we not teach the civil rights movement? Okay, let's say our community is 99% Christian. Should kids not learn about Judaism? Should kids not learn, or should we protect them from that? That's what I'm getting at. This is a general statement, so it doesn't clarify it directly. But all of you, what you're talking about, Gary, is clarified in it down below. So I'm talking about from a general education perspective. I'd mentioned classical education last week. That's what I'm talking about. That you don't want to limit classical education to just what one community believes, because you limit our kids' breadth of knowledge of the world they have to live in, which is going to become more and more complex as every day goes by.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just don't see how this policy or even that line would channel the district to do that. Because that's really what we're concerned about.
But to me, it sounds like it's doing that, is my point. And it sounds like it potentially could be doing that to others as well. The
So
things Gary's
just,
talking about has been
just-
covered below.
A little bit of, I don't know if it's piling on or segueing. But I'm remembering, when I brought this up, it was purely from legal. Joey, you brought that up, but you also brought up, and Debbie did at the time too, that whole, kind of there's a vagueness, and it was even written in the kind of questioning of legal. The vagueness of that is the thing that's creating a stumbling block for people. We talked about trust and that sort of thing, and if we can eliminate that in some way, we're so close to having some consensus here. And then you actually had another reason than this before, and it was that whole avoiding that stumbling block, and you almost hook it like personal, that like, hey, if there's people in the community that think we're trying to do something or
Oh, yeah, Mike
here, that's
is,
cool, like, because
Yeah.
we want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Because clearly nobody on this board is looking to do that. So how do we communicate that? In my opinion, we do it by eliminating something when someone brings it up, who's in that camp, who's saying, either I'm offended by this, or I'm hearing other words here, hearing something else here behind this because it's vague and it's code language for something else. So we can just remove that. Great, let's remove it.
yeah, and some perceive that statement as code language for certain things,
Yeah, so
which was
personally,
not
I've
the
moved
intent.
on
I
to being a
don't-
little bit ambiguous,
Yeah.
like kind of, hey, I'm just bringing this up, like,
Yeah.
should we remove it? Kind of not having a sway one way or another, but after the conversation, listening to Debbie and listening to some of the comments, I'm more for like, we need to change this. We need to be clear, turn this from a stumbling block into a win.
So can I ask? It says, while reflecting the unique values, needs, and priorities of our local community. What words in there seem to trigger those of you that read that as something more than just a nod to our local community? Because I don't think it's local community. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think it's that. What is it about reflecting or unique or values or needs and priorities that kind of makes hair stand on it? I'm really curious, because
I think it means different things to different people.
Yeah, I think that's, you think you just hit it
So
on.
if you were to ask, 10 different people what makes our community unique, get maybe 10 different answers.
For me,
Some people would say, what makes our community unique is what, what the majority might think is unique is not what I'm all about. I'm about something else.
That's
And so how does this represent me, And I think that's what I heard with the feedback we received and some of Debbie's comments. And then again, I think Joe, you did a better job than I did when you mentioned kind of your, reaction to hearing that comment
So
that existed.
a statement that says it aligns with the values, needs, and priorities of the local community or our local community goes against that, like that statement. That's what I'm trying to come to, Justin.
Well, we are the local community at this table right now. We're representing the local community, so
Okay.
we've already established that it's our ability to go ahead and create this policy, and we haven't even this session talked about 7 or 8, which we still need to. But it's there. So if this is a stumbling block to people and we can change it, modify it, eliminate the stumbling block.
Well, so,
What is it establishing as far as policy
so
goes?
partially what that sentence is doing is it's talking about district goals, state standards, and it's the state standards part that the stuff after the comma is trying to essentially push back on a little bit, right? It's the 2 clauses of the sentence. We're doing this. We know we have to state standards, but it's going to be adjusted for a local community. We're saying that because much of the case law talks about local communities get to do that. That's why we want the word local community in there.
So what if we take everything that's out?
It's kind of what
Standards.
that's what I've been trying to find out
Local
last
community.
meeting and this meeting is. I don't think you should remove local community because it's district goals, it's state standards, and aligning with the local community. But that's what I'm trying to find, but somehow that's a buzzword and I'm super confused about that because we all live in this community. Like, I don't understand why that's a buzzword or phrase.
Well, I think leaving local communities by taking those parts out
To get people.
defines. Makes
Appreciate
people
you saying that.
because
Yeah.
they're pinholing what they're perceiving what we think our community is. But
What-
if you just put local community.
What did you just say to this?
I said, I don't think our local community is personally, I don't think it's a sticking point. I think if you have district goals, comma, state standards, comma, and our local community,
That,
you're gonna
yeah,
hit all our.
that's where I'm getting at, because for example, when I say from
It's the
yeah,
unique values, needs and priorities,
It's
that's the
unique.
sticking point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
I agree.
So let's say
It's just-
let's say we took out everything that's highlighted in yellow except for local community. And somebody asks, well, what does that mean? Where does the local community play into this? The answer would be
Yes,
But like these people.
Yeah.
to do what?
to reflect the
To
value.
reflect the unique values,
Yeah.
needs and priorities of the
I
local
say take that
community.
part out.
That's the content. I mean, what does it mean? If you put in local community, why? What does it say?
Why? Because local community relates to all the case law and stuff.
see,
Yes, I agree. I'm saying if you take out the stuff that is before and our local community is describing why it's pertinent to even put in local community at all.
I disagree with that.
I think local community pushes back against the tension against state standards.
And if that's the goal, then I think it makes sense to your point, leave our local community in and then remove the other pieces.
agree with that.
I think local community is inclusive.
And see, I struggle with the unique values and needs, because when I see that, if I living in the South, okay, I lived in South Carolina, Tennessee for 15 years, okay.
Sorry.
If I went to Cookeville, Tennessee, I'll even put it better than that. When I was at Hammond School in Columbia, South Carolina, we took the Confederate flag down in 1990 and integrated the school, okay. if 1988, they had the materials in our school would align with the, oh, you took it away.
I can undo.
Would reflect the unique values and needs and priorities of our school or our local community in Cookeville, Tennessee, or Columbia, South Carolina. That would have meant a whole other thing, and it would have to do with race. Okay, so it gets into the education aspect for me at that point. I think that what Gary's saying right there, that idea, I don't have a problem with local community. I have a problem that it has to reflect the unique values and priorities.
Because whose unique values? and
Yeah.
priorities?
That's where the
Because maybe
question.
ours are different.
So I think the pushback by the local community having that in there gives Gary the pushback he's talking about, which is important. Much better than just district goals, because I thought district goals did it, but local community makes it clear.
No, want me to make the change so you can see it?
So, Joe, when it says align with our local community, kind of like Nathan was saying.
Well, your PAC is part of your local community that helps to
District goals and
that
standards are
curricular instructional materials. So that's a broad group of people that are looking at things and that reflect our local community. It's one of the filters.
We're thinking
Do you want to put
some level of consensus here and move on?
an asterisk after community be helpful to have a nod to Pico relative to the language there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's not just Pico that uses.
I know there's lots of.
I don't know that a reference to a case is gonna help us if we're in some legal hot water. No. No. Yeah.
And everybody can read their own way.
Alrighty.
Next. Gary, what was at 1.5 speed, what else did we get? We should all talk at one point.
It's 8:28. Do we want to spend any time diving into 7 or the 25 days? To me, those are the two issues that needed maybe some more discussion. Or Gary, do you have other things based on our last meeting that you feel need to be?
Yes, so related to the 25 days. Again, back to some case law. As noted earlier, nothing in our decision today affects in any way the discretion of a local school board to choose books to add to the libraries for their schools. There is a legal distinction between proposed material to come into the district, adoption by the district. Once it's on the other side of the line, it's treated differently by law. So that 25-day period, or whatever you want to call a review period, and however the administration decides they're going to deal with people who say, are you sure this meets the policy type of thing, is a distinction we need to make. Because if we don't, if we try to say as soon as the books are picked that they're on the other side of the line and trying to throw them into our challenge process, they're legally different. We don't want to go there. Much harder.
So where we left off our last meeting was me kind of challenging maybe Nathan and this whole group on, are we all on the same page about what it says right now? Do you think it says that right now?
Nope.
Okay, so you would agree, if you just go by this, it does put it into the status quo. It's been selected category, and it's just sitting on a list for 25 days before it physically gets on this.
Yeah, it is not clear.
So based
when
on
it
that,
crosses the line.
you're probably recommending changes that define the selection process.
I went away last time thinking, at what point do they cross the line? Is
Right.
it when they're purchased? isn't when they're selected. What's the end?
So, well, we need to be very clear on when that occurs.
Would you like me to check with legal on it?
I
What's that, Tim?
would think.
Would
that
you like
we-
me to check with legal on that?
I mean,
Well,
I think that determination is
I just think we
important.
need to.
I'd just go back to what it says here and then let's, whether it's a straw poll or whatever, in concept. You know, out of this group, who wants to go not backwards, but change it to where instead of saying materials will be selected by a librarian, that you actually insert something before that that says before materials are selected by the librarian.
Prior to purchase.
Before they're purchased.
So if that's the case, I mean, how many want to go into that direction
Just like
versus
with
moving in
curriculum,
the
we don't-
direction that is
we
already
don't buy
stated?
curriculum until it goes through a 30-day public review.
So I have a question. This is one area where I was really a little bit confused about kind of what the intent is behind this. And one of it, Gary's, and I don't want to misstate what you've said, but something related to it's easier to get a book out before it's, you know, on the shelf than once it's on the shelf. And I guess what I'm confused about is what is the intent? To make it easier to not get certain books out to begin with, or to give parents a chance to know what's in the library and give them an option to challenge it or to put it on a list for their own kid? Because those are two very different things to
The
me.
intent, my answer would be, the intent would be similar to what we do with curriculum currently, where it gets selected and then it goes out for review. So if there's concerns or issues that can be discussed and dealt with. And so it is involving the public and parents in the process on the front end to save us trouble on the back end. It's being proactive rather than reactive on the other side if there are issues that come up.
And if I'm reading
Chad, would
Senate
you
Bill
agree that that's where you
1098,
want this policy to go? I'm just trying to get a little bit of a feel of like,
I was
who's-
gonna add
who's
to what
in
you
what
just said.
order.
Did you have something you want to say about Senate Bill 10?
Well, Senate Bill 1098, I would say it's not going to be public. It's going to be parents and
Yeah.
staff.
Which is what we say for the most part, at the beginning of this.
Right. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify, you said public and I just want to make sure we're on the same
Yeah,
page.
not outside of the district.
So hang on a second. Senate Bill 1098 talks about books that are on the other side of the wall. Senate Bill 1098 says only parents and staff and
Can
That-
challenge.
No, doesn't even say students can
Yeah.
challenge.
so. Once it's on the other side of the line, Senate Bill 1098
That
considerably
is a
should
good
tighten up the
point,
rules
Gary.
before Senate Bill 1098 does not apply.
This year. Up to you two.
Well, it
Yeah.
doesn't speak to the selection of, it speaks to challenging something that's already there. So that actually is a good point, and that's a good nuance. For that, but you know, that's one of those things. Tim's thinking, you want me to check with legal on that?
Tim's gonna check with legal on that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I did ask legal is, because sometimes you can. Right, we see it all the time, this federal government says, this is the law, you can't infringe upon these people's rights. And the state will say, well, we're gonna expand people's rights, so one of the questions I did ask is, can the
Yeah.
board say,
Well-
okay, we're gonna allow others besides just student or staff and parents to. Challenge, and the law in this case is pretty specific that you can't, but I did not ask the question about. Can
Yeah.
people weigh in before the purchase, so I will
It,
check with that.
it will be, so however that turns out, Tim, you know, whether it's parents of students in, you know, the district or the public broadly, either way, you know, having that ability to say, here's your chance to look, and resolving issues if they come up is gonna save the district trouble on the back end. I think you know, I understand there may be some inconveniences for doing that, but I think, you know, particularly being an elected board, elected by the public, we really need to stand firm on the side of transparency and public involvement, especially with things like this.
And then one possibility would be, however, you know, librarian can select stuff and all that, and it's just like teacher contracts. We don't do anything with that. Superintendent brings this to us, but the board acts and says yes to these contracts. We can do the same thing with material coming into the district. They can come up with their ARs, say they do all this stuff. When it comes to the board says, yes, this stuff is now across the line, approved into the district.
First question with that. So, you know, and I have reviewed what the process is for if someone challenges a book, and it is robust. I think that if a book is selected, aligned with, you know, this policy, and it still gets challenged, you know, and it goes through that really robust process that's already in place, I'm concerned about there not being as robust of a process on the front end. So when you say it's easier, I'm just hung up on when you say it's easier to remove a book before it's on the shelves than after it's on the shelves.
Well,
You're saying you want a less robust process?
Gary is saying it's easier to keep a book out than to remove a book,
Okay.
so it's
So
pre-purchased.
with
Am I
keeping
saying
the
that
book
right?
out, if we somehow determine that a book should be kept out, is it not gonna go through as potentially as robust of a process? I mean, I think
Well, if it doesn't meet this, you know, if it's demonstrated that it doesn't meet the selection criteria, there's red flags with the content, you know, then.
but who's determining that? Because the challenge process states how that's determined.
Yeah, that's,
How-
that's gonna be an AR that,
Yeah, it's.
It would be clarified in AR, and it would have to be an official challenge. It's not like a phone call to Tim, hey, Tim, I'm an angry parent, and blah, blah, and then Tim's gonna run over and, you know, do something. It'd have to be an official challenge and consideration, and that determination has to be made.
Why, I don't know what the ARs look like, but I'm sure that there would be some sort of. I mean, if we would,
July 22nd?
this,
We don't-
I
Yeah.
would
I
ask
understand
the
that. I
librarian.
understand that. I just.
Reconsider and really make sure that it aligns. and-
So
Pre-
what I'm hearing is that the proposal is not without getting the language right, would be the definition of officially selected wouldn't take place until the 25 days is over. And books haven't been challenged, but essentially you'd be creating two versions of a challenge. One would be pre-adopted.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like post-selected, pre-adopted, because we still want the librarian, like, I feel like we were moving away from the committee, that this was the response to remove away from the committee, which had a lot of complications and everything. So you end up having it's status quo, librarian selects, but then we have this 25-day purgatory where it's not officially approved and people can file a challenge, and that looks a little bit different than if it's after it's in, and then that.
Well,
there's a whole different challenge.
we were trying to do two things with this. One was the transparency aspect. Right? But the other part is that it's much easier to do review and stuff. And we have tons of case law saying that if we just don't choose it, that's fine. Right? Once it's on the other side of the line, it becomes this big deal, much harder.
Yeah, and just to note, we have a lot of people pushing back on the 25 days as it's written, which is just the transparency piece.
Right.
We will have a lot more pushback if it's going back to, hey, it's not even approved and we're adding this other hurdle to the approval process.
I don't know that it's going back. Again, that's how you have read it without the AR that describes this process. So let's not get ahead of where we actually are. Based upon the way that you're interpreting.
I agree,
It's
there's
been interpreted.
misconception on what this
Two
actually.
primary different ways.
Gary did agree with me, though, if you read it as it says right now, right?
That it lacks clarity.
It's
is what I
saying
heard
it's
Gary say.
selected and that the 25 days is just an after.
And it said selected instead of purchased for a reason. The language for curriculum is adopted. So if you want to ask a legal question about that, that might be.
And right, because. So I'm the librarian, I decide I'm gonna purchase these books, I've selected these books for purchase. I put them out there on the list. I haven't purchased them yet, but I've selected them for purchase. Have I started the clock then? Because I've selected them, or do I have to purchase them? And then that's when the clock starts, right? With the, right?
But the-
Or do you have to wait a 25-day
well,
time
to
clock
to me,
before you
the
can purchase
purchasing
something,
is
and
like
that's-
the end of the process.
Potentially, but let me check on that,
Right.
because, right? If I'm trying to hear what Gary's saying about, it's easier to keep things from coming in. Then once they're in, getting them out. When does that start? With just, here's a list. Well, now the book's on the list, so you were gonna select it, so is it now in? I don't know that.
I think that's a good thing to find out.
Right, but I mean, one way to fix that is just to make it the board approves. Or adopts, or whatever you want to say. I mean, that's
Adopts what?
any of the material coming in, any instructional material coming into the district.
Yeah, but I'm really not talking about instructional material, because we do that already. I'm talking about library material.
I'm saying same thing for library material. I'm saying you can, if it's necessary to comply with legal issues, we can make it a board action to bring the material into the district.
So now it would have to go, be selected, it'd have to rely on the librarian to say, yes, I think this meets muster based on the criteria, would have to wait 25 days. Or,
Selected or recommended?
and then it would have to wait whatever time there was between when that ended and when the next board meeting was to say, yes, we've gone ahead and we've approved those things, so we're making it more than a 25 day waiting.
Board should
But
be getting in the
yeah,
middle
the
of
board
that.
should
I
not
don't
be
think the
in-
board should be
I do
making
not.
that decision.
Are you saying that?
Yes.
What do you say?
I'm saying that if it becomes necessary due to legal stuff, in other words, if somebody's gonna argue that as soon as the librarian selects it, that it's district library material, then we can't have that.
I'm not saying that's the case. I just
I
want to
know.
make sure.
I understand.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is we can, if necessary, not that it's ideal, say that material coming in to the library has to be approved, adopted, pick your word, by the board. It's a board action, because by law, boards have that authority. I'm not saying it's ideal.
Not a
I'm
legal
saying it's
expert.
legal.
I would probably want to
Need to
hear
know
that
what
from a
it
legal
is.
expert too.
So anyway, I'll get you information. That's what I'm getting. I've got 3 questions I'm asking.
Well, is curriculum adopted when it's selected before it's purchased? Is it considered adopted?
I don't believe so, no, it's adopted, but it's a.
Right,
but
'cause
they're
right,
very
it's-
different things and the law treats them differently.
Right.
Goes for
Yeah.
supplemental instructional materials, do not get board.
It's established, right, I understand that. It's established legally that the board adopts that, but there isn't anything that prohibits a board from also saying they want to adopt
I don't know that that's
other
accurate.
materials.
I think state law may say something different, but I don't know explanations, but I'll get you answers. You're gonna ask something else.
I wasn't gonna ask anything. I was gonna clarify something.
Oh, okay.
Justin asked me something a minute ago. Quinn was asking a question. I wanted to just kind of speak to those 2 things, and then I have a feeling we're 15 minutes past. Robert's Rules of Order says we should be done when we're saying. I'm pretty certain that's in there somewhere.
That's just been found facts and stuff.
So the very first sentence in this entire policy says the board is legally responsible for the selection of instructional materials with the assistance of district personnel and involving parents, students, and community members that reside in the non-voting district. That first sentence is translated here in terms of parental involvement. And we can talk about 1098 and all that stuff, but that is why this is where it is. That is why we came up with 25 days. Dustin's 100% right. This started off as a committee involving parents. This 25 days gives parents, families, the ability to be involved in the decision-making process for what goes into the library. I've heard loosely that students and parents are involved. If they want to be, they can look at things whenever they want to. It's available on the district website. This specifically says, this is what I, as the professional librarian, have selected, and I'm planning to put in the library in 25 days. This is the front end, so yes, I do want to create the clarity that Gary was talking about, whether it's in the AR here, I don't care, but that was intended. And if it got cut out, which I think it did when we went through the so many iterations of this and the 3 paragraphs that have been removed, that is very, very important for me personally. And for many that I talked to in the community, is to have the ability to have front end involvement, not waiting until things are already in the library. And I thought that was something that was clear, at least that Tim had seemed to understand that in the AR, that was understood, at least as of last meeting and meetings before, but then it got.
And the reason it's 25 days is if we have a purchase order or
30
a
days
quote,
is the
usually it's
length of
30, so that gives us the 25 days to run the process, 5 days to make the purchase.
This went from the committee to 60 days to encouragement for 0 days and then 5 days, and then we are at 25 days. And I would say there has been a lot of work to get to where we are right now. And yes, clarity, but I don't think this should go anywhere.
That question. Because I definitely understand that. I think what is still confusing for me is I understand wanting there to be the ability to see it on the front end. So you're not waiting till it's in the library. Parents and families have some heads up on the front end. But for me, what I'm,
More than heads up.
well, okay, purchase,
The ability to actually have a voice.
the ability to have a voice. My question is it about, and maybe it's a both and, is it about the transparency piece? Or we also, is the goal to get to something that also is the ability to remove them before they're actually in the library? Because from my perspective, because there is a challenge process in place that is robust, if there were a book put on that list for 25 days, there's nothing that prevents me from, as a parent, let's say, from putting that on a list of books my child cannot access. So I have the ability to not only see it ahead of time, maybe plan to challenge it, but make sure my child cannot access it. But then still have the ability for it to go through a robust process. So I'm affecting what my child has access to. I'm not dictating what everyone else's child has access to. That for me makes sense. The whole concept of something being easier to get out before it comes to being in the library and then going through that challenge process, that's where I'm having some difficulty.
I think one way to look at it is if you have an array of possibilities in front of you, 50 books or whatever, on a certain topic, it could be anything, history, relationships, whatever, blah, 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 doesn't matter the topic. The ones that don't have the sexually explicit stuff are the ones you select. So it's about selection, and that's the reason why Miller Nash, when they gave their opinion, that he did reference, and I think I shared this last time, concerning First Amendment issues in general, school boards possess significant discretion to determine the content of their school libraries. He's not just talking about core curriculum. And goes on, given the draft's policy, focus on selection of materials and not removal, and the discretion school boards have to select instructional materials, we do not see any constitutional path to challenge draft policy. So the focus is on selection. The challenge part is going to come when somebody, with the ARs, and when somebody makes an official challenge, and the district will, I imagine, do something like you did last time with kind of the group that was put together to review it. And if they review it and go, yeah, there's stuff in here that it shouldn't have been selected, then maybe it might be removed, depending. So it's the selection process up front that the board has significant authority and ability to influence. And that's why we're talking front end.
No,
And
I understand that. I just might not agree with
Sure.
the both and approach. The transparency piece makes sense to me. The ability for parents to know what their kids have access to and maybe limit that makes sense to me. We might just have a just a difference of opinion on the other part. So I think I understand the perspective, I understand the intent, I just might not agree. Which is why we've got 7 people.
Well, that's right.
So-
Yeah.
There's no,
Well,
It's gonna, you
there's
know,
no
so,
requirement to agree.
yeah, so it's not, you know,
It
it's
should
just,
robust
trying to
discussion,
understand.
but
I mean, in
You know-
concept, I hear 3 opinions really saying that's where we thought it was, that's where we want to go. I'm hearing a little bit of your opinion, Quinn, just in Joe and Cassie. I'm happy to share mine. I have before.
I would just,
On this, but
I'd like to say one more thing to that. When the one thing that. What I just heard from you, well, I think is great for a parent that's gonna be able to. To do everything that you just said, but it takes the onus to some extent. And puts it completely on the parent to know every book that their child might have access to within the entirety of the library.
in a library, most parents never step
So
into.
we're talking about new books though, and new books within a 25-day period. So it's not them reviewing every book in the library, it's them viewing books within that 25-day period.
Right, so this hasn't been in place before, but it would be in place going forward, and so it gives that ability for parents to know going forward and to have a say before things are in the library. So that they might not have to feel that way, but they have to know everything that's in the library. And again, we can have different opinions and the community can have different opinions completely. I respect that. But that's just one of the kind of point to is that puts the onus on the parent to know everything that exists. And this is a way to put it out there ahead of time. So that if they go, hey, wait, I don't think that aligns with, you know, point number 4 or point number 8 or point number 2 or 7 or whatever within selection criteria. Superintendent Sweeney, will you take a look at that for me? And it's day 14.
And you asked my opinion, and I said early on, you need to know where the line is.
It's a line.
I'll give you my opinion. I think we've spent a lot of work and I have, a lot of work, a year's worth of work. On this one policy, we've been spending a year on it. I recognize that in any community, the world isn't black and white. And I think we're trying to create a black and white policy in many ways based on specific content that is not approved by some, but would be approved by others. I've said this in a meeting before. There is junk in the library, and I don't think school libraries should have junk in them, and there should be a process. But I also recognize that, as Quinn was saying, the individual parent should be making that choice, not a few people making the choice for every parent. Okay, that's what's been uncomfortable for me for all this. Now, what would I do? There are books that are in that library that I wouldn't want my child to read. And I would love to have, as a parent, the ability to keep that from happening. But who am I to say that that parent over there has a completely different set of circumstances with their child? That book wouldn't, that parent wouldn't believe that book is valuable for their child. Now, I know the argument. You can go to the public library and you can get them. You could order it yourself online and so forth and so on. And that's a tough one because you can. It's true. That's a good argument. So it gets back to what is the board's responsibility? And again, if we're trying to empower parents, okay, it makes me nervous that we're trying to empower parents to just do one thing. If you empower parents, you're giving parents the ability to make the choice for their children. You're not giving the parents, you're not making the choice for every child. Or a certain group of parents to make the choice for every child. Now, Gary's essay that he read, it's high quality. I mean, it's well written. It's a wonderful argument, and it all relates to the sexuality stuff. That's what it all relates to. I don't think this group, I've never sensed that this group is doing this to impact the LGBTQ community. That accusation has been made, but the perception is out there. So we have to be careful with that perception. Now, I'm at the point now where I'm ready to say, let's just get this thing passed and move it on and let the legal world deal with it. That's kind of where I am. Because I feel like we're just spinning our wheels. I just feel like we're just spinning our wheels. But I still believe, from an educator's standpoint, empowering parents is a really good thing. But you don't empower parents by saying every parent has to do what you say. You haven't empowered a parent. There's a large group of parents out there that you've taken power away from. So I like the challenge that we have now, that if there's a book in the library and it's challenged, it goes through a process. It's read, it's a group of parents that get together, they look at it, and they're reflective of the community as parents and professional educators, and they're looking at it and they're saying, yeah, that's a bit over the line. Okay. But, that's my opinion. But as I've said before, I'm conservative. When I look at my own family, there are things in that library that I would call trash. Okay. From my perspective, but not from yours or yours or yours or whatever, from my perspective.
Well, you don't have to be conservative to understand the least harm principle. And the reason why you don't smoke in Oregon in restaurants. Because even though some people really love to smoke and others do not, it's the least harm principle. No smoking in restaurants. Because we don't want to harm those who don't have a choice. And I don't think
I think that's much more black and white than what we're dealing with here. I think that example is much more black.
The vast majority of parents, I do want to go out on a limb and say they don't have the opportunity to come into the school and peruse the library to see what exactly their kids might have access to. And so
they do have online access to everything in the library.
Every community member.
But to say that that they would have the ability to determine whether or not their child actually accesses that, I mean, you don't know what they're going into and what they're doing. So if you prefer they not access it, it would be nice to just trust that the school is not going to provide something potentially harmful just because maybe some people think that it should be there. So it's the least harm principle. But I do get what you're saying. I just don't totally agree. I think the best way to do least harm is to be neutral on something, and you're not picking a side. So you provide a wide array of books and materials that represent all views. You just don't select the stuff that has the most egregious sexually explicit stuff. That's really all this is doing. All viewpoints are welcome and encouraged. All backgrounds are welcome and encouraged. Just not the highly sexualized stuff. When you have choices in front of you, pick the stuff that does not have that in it. That's all it's doing.
Well, I'm gonna say that come to the end here, and I did promise I'd share my opinion. I've shared it before. I'll be blunt. You have one more thing before I close this out.
Yep. Third paragraph, you guys changed gender to gender identity. And you left in the word gender.
Gender and gender identity.
They're two different things.
But for some reason, this particular list, which is coming from some ORSs, does not have both. It only has gender identity.
This gets to it. This got, from my perspective, it got to the issue that I was discussing that Dustin brought up, my two reasons for concern. And one was that there is a large number in the community that believe that we are dealing and concerned that about the LGBT group, that we're upset that kind of stuff is in there. And anything we can do to alleviate that misconception, because it's a misconception, we should do. And we should recognize that gender identity is different than gender and include that in there.
Well, I'm saying that gender shouldn't be in there. Gender identity is fine.
Gender would be biological.
Okay,
Gender identity would be physical, would be
there's biological sex and then there's the concept of
Gender.
gender.
Yeah.
So it is, I mean, I felt, that's why I
Yeah.
said it seemed redundant to
Yeah.
have both. Last time.
The only thing I'm pointing
agree
out
with that.
is this was a laundry list that came straight out of, started at 1098, which referenced discrimination, and it says race, color, creed, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, marital status, age, or disability. The word gender is not separate from gender identity. That's the only point I'm making.
Yeah, okay.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, Quinn, is just add the word identity behind gender, but then we wrote in gender identity. In addition to gender, that's why it seemed redundant.
Yeah, and I think it's because what might have happened, and I need to look at the exact list that, or the exact reference that Debbie was making, but it was the thing that was missing from the list. But I don't know if the list she was reading from also included sex and gender identity. And so I can understand if adding gender identity made having sex and gender redundant. So if we want to have just gender identity, remove gender, but then sex is still in there.
That'd be
I
fine.
think sex and gender are
It covers.
referring to the same thing.
You want me to do that?
Not positive, but that's my lay
I think most
person's.
people would agree with that.
But I think the important thing was including gender identity, which is now in there.
I have a question for the parliamentarian. Do first readings have to be in a board meeting? Or can you do a first reading in any public meeting?
You have to,
I think
notify,
on the-
we have to
be
public notify it for so long.
Public
Well,
notice.
also has to allow public comment.
Yeah.
Well, who's
So
the
If you're
parliamentarian?
asking if we can, because this was looked into, and I know Tim has the answer too. If you're asking, could this go from a first to a final reading in one session? I believe the answer is yes. But you have to have the prior notification to the public,
Yeah.
as opposed to making like, say now, a
Yeah.
first reading, that would not be acceptable.
Well, that wasn't exactly what I meant, although I'd be fine if we did that, but what
So on
I'm.
July 22nd, can you have a first reading? If it's publicly noticed and it
Right,
allows for public comment, you could.
because I thought maybe you even suggested the possibility, because we're trying to get this done in time for the district to react, to be able to respond. Right,
Well, trying to have it in place if it's the board's
I-
desire from the start of the school year.
so
But.
I'm just wondering,
It's a school year.
I'm just
It's in
wondering
place.
what the pathway forward was.
We did.
Just wonder what the pathway forward is with this. I think
So
it'll be
July
important to
22nd.
have it laid out.
Do it first reading.
Call it.
A
The
board.
deciding factor is the word workshop. Workshop doesn't allow for public comment. So if you just make it a school board meeting on July 22nd and you don't make it a workshop. It's a school board meeting and public comment is allowed.
So unless we feel like we need to keep discussing and tinkering, I think that we should probably make that a board meeting that allows public comment and make it the first reading. And then August would be the second reading. And a vote. That's just a suggestion. Just to stay on a plan of some sort.
Nathan, I'm proud of you for bringing that up and bringing it to a conclusion before we leave.
But
So
before we hear,
what the plan is.
but before we hear Dustin's point of view, because you still have not shared, and I am very curious.
Yeah, I said it in the last meeting. I, in particular to the 25-day thing. When we got to the point where the language was this way, I was in the camp of like, okay, we've moved on from the committee and the process, including some other version of parent involvement, and we're just, the librarian selects, and we're just focused on transparency, and I am okay with that. So to put it bluntly, I support the language the way it is now. And I think it would be very challenging for this group based on some of the comments that come together on a version that spells out a preemptive challenge participation purgatory mode. So that's just what my. And with that,
Yeah.
Do it.
I'm going to adjourn our workshop.